Okay, well, answering your last question there on the PowerPoint, I just thought it's also, I think, important to point out the type of learner also. So I always like to, as well as spoken instructions, to have them written down on the board or written down as a PowerPoint, just so that there are learners who may be more visual, and they, even if they do switch off as they're listening, they've then got the instructions on the board to go back to. And also, like you said, with the modelling as well, always have an example and a model so that, all types of learners, whether they're kinesthetic learner or visual learner, all the types of learners are getting, the different types of instructions that suit them.
Could I ask you, Lydia, when you were saying that about having the instructions on the board as well, do you put the instructions on the board at the same time that you're giving the verbal instructions, or do you give the verbal instructions and then put them on the board and say, just so you can refer back if you need to? What do you do?
Yeah, so usually I will give the instructions and then show an instruction at the time on the board, so that it's not confusing, so they're not trying to listen and read at the same time. And then when we're reviewing the instructions and getting the students to relay the information back, checking for CCQs, we can then refer back to the board. Or even if we've started an activity and the students, maybe they can't remember some of the information, could just refer back to the board then for instructions. And I think that's more useful for them than the teacher always referring the information back. Yeah, what do you think about writing the instructions up?
It kind of links into a question in the chat. Gabi has asked if you do that with all levels. I do that with lower level students. I don't have very many lower level or school students. I would do that with school students. Like you said, just to remind them, with my university students, the only instructions that I put on the board are the homework instructions. Well, like read this article, do this, and answer this question. That's the only thing. And then what they do after that is, because they're going home to do it, they just take a picture of the screen, which I don't really like. But I've never had to. Olive Tan says she summarizes instructions on her PowerPoint slide and leaves it on. Yeah. If you're using PowerPoint, I mean, if you're using PowerPoint, right? If you're not using PowerPoint, if it's a more speaking lesson, if it's face-to-face in a classroom and you're working with worksheets, then it's not possible.
That's right, Emma. And like Gabi says as well, always step at a time, otherwise it can be confusing. Before this session we were talking, weren't we, what it's like to be a language learners ourselves, and then to know what it's like from the other point of view. So do you think it's important for teachers to also be a language learner? Do you think that gives a better instructions?
I think definitely. I think for many of us, many teachers, our foreign language learning experience could well be some time back, so we forget what it's like to be in the learner's shoes, and maybe that little reminder, that experience, and we learn so much as well being language learners ourselves. We had one, Lydia, somebody's said, Abdul Samad has said it's better to rehearse the instructions before going into class. Have you done that before?
Yeah, when I was first qualified and just fresh off the CELTA, I think it's definitely a good idea to write down the instructions and just to practice them in your head, to keep, like you said in your PowerPoint, to keep them simple and to keep them concise, and also to repeat the way that you give instructions. Someone had written about the attention. So in the Q&A, Salvatore has written, do classroom instructions activate behaviour, and what to do when they don't guide student behaviour. So I think what they mean by that is, if you keep repeating instructions, eventually students kind of go into automatic mode. So when you say, in groups of 3, they know what to do because it's been repeated so many times.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's something that I encourage my trainee teachers to do. I mean, there's two ways of looking at it. There are people, there are trainers who say, oh no, you shouldn't, write down your instructions word for word, because then you'll stick to the script, right? It becomes a script for you. But I think the way you said it, Lydia, and I think maybe that's not really what the participant up to Samad meant when he said about rehearsing. I think what you're doing is listing the steps, listing everything in the sequence that you want it to happen. And that's what I do myself, so I have my rough lesson plan, and then I write working groups or whole class work, work in pairs and things like that. And also the questions, the discussion questions that I want to put on the board, I write that in my lesson plan, so I know what to write on the board. So that's part of it, is rehearsing.
Having the structure,
having the structure. It's what I said, as part of my advice, is that practice makes perfect. And if you yourself always have that same structure, you get better. Somebody's asked in the Q&A, Lydia, I think a lot of our participants are working with students who don't listen, who have very low attention span. What advice have you got?
Yeah, it's getting the attention, isn't it? And a couple of people have mentioned in the group, I think it was Josie, mentioning breathing techniques to calm students down and get their attention. I thought that was a really good idea. Do you do things like that to kind of get the students calmer, especially after lunch or something like that? It can be quite a challenge, can't it, to bring the tempo of the class down? So I thought that was a great idea. Something that I like to implement in my classes with my younger learners as well. Also just using music, you want to grab their attention with something quick. So I like to use a music to get their attention with younger learners, setting a sequence, like you said, with the structure of the instructions. It can start before you even give the instructions, so that students know where they have to sit and how they need to be. Maybe they hear a sound, so that they know that that's the time to be quiet, to listen for the instructions. What do you do though to grab your students' attention?
I just stand there. I just stand there and say nothing. I just stand there and say nothing, and then they're very suspicious because it's very quiet. But talking about students who are just all over the place, young teenage learners, learners in lower school, kindergarten learners, what you can do, I think, is, let's say if you were doing a craft activity, you could hold up, say, the pencil. Whoops, you can't see my pencil. The stapler. Whoops. And then, you can hold up some of those items that you're going to be using, and that will get their attention. You could say, look, today we're going to do something where we'll be using these things.
Yeah, that's nice. You could get them to hold the things up also.
Yeah.
So then they're thinking about the objects they need to get instead of, is grabbing their attention.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing you could do is also, like you're saying, you could say, today, we're doing something where you need your scissors. Get out your scissors really quick. So they like that because they're activating. They're not sitting still listening to you. So you get them, like you said, to tell out their things. Another thing you can do, it's the age-old question in ELT. Do you give instructions first and then divide your students? Or do you divide your students first and then give the instructions, right? So you could, I would say, divide your students first, but make a competition out of it. You could say, I want you to get into pairs in under 30 seconds. In under a minute, and if that becomes routine at some point, they'll know that you want to start the lesson then. And you could do something. I do a thing in my class where I would say, okay, I need you in groups of 3, And as soon as you're in your groups of 3, put your head down at the desk, and they'd have to look down like that. And they all think it's
And
really weird.
do you award them points then as well?
Well, no, they're 20 years old, so
Everyone likes a competition though.
yeah, but it's just the, you know, I mean, the only benefit for them being the first is that if they put their head down, if they're the first to have their head down, they get a longer little break, you know, 10 seconds more than the others.
Incentive there to be ready.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've just noticed on the chat, so someone's asking about one-to-one students. So obviously, you know, getting into pairs or getting into groups, it's a bit different when you're teaching one-to-one students. So I guess thinking about how to use, you know, the instructions more efficiently. Have you taught one-to-one students? How have you managed giving instructions then?
Well, I mean, with one-to-one students, you have your set routines, don't you? And it also depends on the age of the learner. So I might hold up the textbook and I might say, right, what do you think we're going to be doing out of here today? You know, so obviously the learner has to, you know, your student has to think back, oh, what did we do last and what could we possibly be doing? So I involve the learner in the, how would you say, in the formulation of our instructions. I'll call it then our instructions, our workflow. Yeah, that's what I do. What do you do? I read that you teach a lot of one-to-one students.
Yeah, so I've recently started teaching more one-to-ones. I think the best thing, you know, like you said, is getting involved, because you're teaching, but you're essentially a student as well, aren't you? So it's modeling lots of things, showing examples first so that they fully know what to do. And, you know, if they don't understand something, that can then become part of the lesson also.
And you become a partner. It's more like, you're more like a conversation partner.
Yeah, it's much more personal.
Yeah, yeah. I've got somebody here who's brought in some experience from other subjects. This participant teaches mathematics and itemizes the steps and the instructions, and that's absolutely, you know, my go-to thing as well. You itemize, you, for every step you do, you know, you give the first step and you wait. I mean, don't wait forever. I mean, you have a particular amount of time that you're willing to wait. And then if you see people, you know, they're lagging behind, they're not with it, I go up to them and say, look, are you ready? We're waiting for you. And that gets them going.
Yeah, that's nice. Like your idea with, you know, drawing the star and making sure that everyone's up to the same step.
Yeah.
I can see someone in the Q&A here. So they've written, strongly advise beginning teachers in training to have scripted lesson plans so that everything is done or said is scripted. It's almost like a drama presentation. And so what's your view about this, about, you know, having a scripted lesson plan and following everything to the script?
I think you can have a scripted lesson plan. I wouldn't recommend you hanging on to it like it was your life, you know, your life your life vest. It's good to have it. If you feel that the trouble with a script, you know, like, you know, if you're in a play and you have a script, you have to follow that script. Okay, you can't improvise. But if you're in class, you will need to improvise. You'll have the script for what you want to say, but you won't have your prepared responses for what you could say if somebody did something else. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, let's say you had a script for the first 5 minutes of your class and you've written down, good morning class, let's take attendance, and you've written that down, and you do your taking attendance, and you go, okay, let's check the homework from the last lesson. And then in your script, you've got down who you're asking and how you would ask that. But imagine you came into class and you did it right up to the homework, and 10 of your 30 students didn't do the homework. You know, what do you do then? And then what happens if you get a fire drill bell halfway in the middle.
Yeah, it's unpredictable, isn't it? You can have your script, but you need to know how to
improvise.
Improvise and deviate from the script.
Yeah, and adjust your language, because when you're writing down your script also, I think what we have to remember is that we're looking at it from the perspective of us in front of the class and what we want to do and what we want to say. We don't always have our students in front of us. However, when we're in front of class, and I have it even with my 23-year-old students who've been learning English for 10 years, at least, I could stand there and I'd have my script and they'd still not understand me because they weren't listening.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of stuck because you hadn't planned for that. What do you think though, Lydia?
Yeah, well, I agree. I think when you're a beginner teacher, you need to have some sort of a script, but not to follow rigidly. You need to have, a contingency plan as well, or something else to be able to improvise as you go along, like you said, because it is unpredictable. You can have it all planned perfectly, and then something can happen which just throws you off your script. I think that's something that you learn as you get more experience as a teacher.
Yeah, I think we should kind of move away from script, but more you could plan actions. Plan as in teacher actions. So they're not activities, but plan actions, like you could write down, get class into groups, and how you want to say that. I mean, I've had trainee teachers who had to teach do their peer teaching, their micro teaching, and they had planned for the class to be divided into groups of 3. And normally we have 27 students in a class. And I had one trainee teacher, when it was her turn to teach, she'd planned for that 27 students, groups of 3, so she would have 9 groups. And she came to class and there were only 12. And that really threw her off because she had planned for 9 groups and she didn't know then what to do. So I think, you'll have to plan broadly, like, do I want group work? Do I want pair work? Do I want them listening to something? But don't script it like a drama. And Gabi says it actually quite nicely in the chat. Gabi says it takes both the teacher and the students to make a lesson.
Yeah, definitely. If we were just teaching, students that didn't speak and didn't participate, then a scripted lesson, would make sense. But because we've got the students who are, coming back with new information, then it's important to be able to deviate away from the script.
We've got somebody in the Q&A who's talked about aggressive behavior and students not following teachers' instructions, what to do. Yeah. Have you ever had students who just don't listen?
Yeah, and it's kind of a cycle really, isn't it? Because are they not listening because they don't understand the instructions? Do they not understand the instructions because they're not listening? It could be, it's like a chicken and an egg, isn't it, really? They may switch off because they may not have the confidence, and they come into the lesson with something else that's happened in the day, and it just makes them not be able to switch on. So I think thinking of, like, we're going back to getting their attention, it's almost you need to engage them with something that snaps them out of thinking, oh, I can't do this, or my English isn't good enough, because usually it comes from a reason. Yeah. But what do you think?
I mean, I have to say, I've been really fortunate that I've never actually encountered, I've never had to deal with aggressive students. So I'm quite lost. I think it's also a very cultural thing. It depends really on where you are. And my students, usually when somebody's behavior is not in, I call it, if it's not in line with my norms, or if they're doing something that's not acceptable in our class, I just look at them and I say, that's not acceptable here, please don't do that.
Yeah.
You know,
And do they engage to that?
Yeah, they just stop talking. I mean, the only problem I ever have with students, I've only ever have two types of problems. One is the age-old problem of students talking when you're talking. So students talking when you're giving instructions. We've all been there. I say it then once. I say, it's my turn to talk. I'm telling you what to do, and please listen. And then, usually half of the class that's listening will kind of stare at the others, and that kind of embarrasses
Peer
them.
pressure then.
Peer pressure. That's the one problem. The other problem I have, so staying with that problem. And then when it happens again, and it's usually the same culprits, and it happens again, I just stop talking, and then it all gets dead silent, and then the peers will look at them again, and then I continue. So I don't usually have to say it more than twice.
It depends on the age of the students as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I used to teach in Spain, and so lots of the students, they were teenagers and they had to study for an exam, and their parents were the ones who made them go to the school, so they didn't necessarily want to be there.
Yeah.
So I think there's that challenge to start with. I think it's just talking to the students and finding out their interests and just showing that, you care about their learning and you're there to help them improve their English. But I think when you find out more about them and show that you're interested, and them finding out things about you, then they're more likely then to engage in the lesson and to pay attention. But it can be challenging to start with.
What we have to remember also, Lydia, like you were saying, the audience, the students that you had that particular baggage, came with that particular background. I have students of a particular background, and a lot of our audience here teach in a different background, totally different to ours, and we'll have some of the things that have been mentioned, things like aggressive students who don't follow your instructions, having extremely large classes, which is has been mentioned elsewhere in other webinars, that this is a problem for teachers. I have to put in a disclaimer that there is no one solution fits everyone. I mean,
I agree with you there.
I mean, I'll stare at my students when they're talking, and then they'll get embarrassed and they'll stop, but I've had other situations where I've heard teachers say, the same thing, and it just continues. So we're here to share ideas, but we don't necessarily always have the answers.
Yeah, and sometimes it's about experimenting, isn't it? Also, I mean, like you said, one thing may work with you and your students that might not work with another teacher, or even sometimes something might work one day with your students and then not another day with the same group of students. It is unpredictable teaching. It's just most of this trial and error, isn't it? And trying something and thinking, oh, it worked, or it didn't work, and I'll try something different until it does work.
Yeah. We've got two people who've put their hand up though, so let's see who's. Oops, no, that was me. So who put their hand up? Let's see who we've got. David. Kunzang is back, but let's have David go first. David, you've put your hand up.
Hello.
Yes. Hello, David.
Okay, please. Now, my question is, anyway, I heard when you were talking about, not have experienced some kind of student. Somebody asked a question similar to the kind of questions I want to ask right now. Now, it's the situation whereby students are usually, let's say, playful, where you find all kinds of students in school because it's common, it's kind of common here in the environment. How can you draw their attention to give instruction, even when you are given such instruction, or even when you are given an instruction? How can you draw their attention? Anyway, I have learned so much for today, But for the sake of emphasis, how can one draw their attention? Thank you.
Okay, so the attention of students, of learners who are just really, really playful. Lydia, you've got experience with
younger
teens.
learners, yeah, and playful younger learners and playful teens. Again, I think it's just getting to know your students and your students getting to know you, so that you know more about each other, so that when they do come in the classroom, like what Khanh-Duc said, she just stands in the classroom. That might work, just standing in silence, or maybe even putting on a song. So with my young learners, we would have a song at the start of the lesson, and that would then tell them that the lesson was starting. And also singing and dancing, it kind of made them feel more relaxed when the lesson did properly start. So I think just having, like the instructions or a sequence, make sure that your lesson is properly sequenced and that the students can see a routine. But that would be more for young learners, because what age are your learners, David?
Between 14 and 16.
Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah.
I was thinking, David, what you can do. I mean, I don't know how things are in your class, but I have a rule in my class. They're not 14 to 16, but I think a lot of learners, when they get together and they haven't seen each other for a few hours or a day or whatever, they get very chatty, and then in your case, you've got learners who 14, 16, teens running around and being really playful. What you can do is, if it's possible, if your learners, let's say your class is to start officially at 12 o'clock and they're in there 5 minutes before the official start time, you can actually set up a routine with them where you can say, right, from whenever you get into class until 12:05, okay, 12 o'clock is your start time. You say until 12:05, you can do whatever you want, get that energy out of you. And what I have is I have a little bell. When I ring the bell, I say, I want your attention on me. So that's one thing. So you give them that time and that space to, play it all out. Or you could play music. Just play music. And then when you want to actually start, you turn off the music. And then they'll look at you because they'll wonder why the music has stopped.
That's nice also. I'm just looking at reading Gabby's comment about giving the students the responsibility of giving the instructions. So how about giving them more responsibility in the classroom also, and giving them kind of more ownership and responsibility of their own learning, especially with teenagers. I think instead of, I'm the teacher and this is what I'm telling you to do, just make them more aware of, why you're giving these instructions to them.
There's also a thing you can do if you have, let's say you have 3-4 steps in an instruction. Okay, so maybe your first step, you want to work from their textbook. Okay, so your first step, if you were to give the instructions yourself, you would say, your first step would be take out your textbook. Then your next step would be open to page 27, and then whatever, right? What you could do is you could write that on cards. You could, on the reverse of the card, let's say you write it on a card about this size. Whoops. Yep, about that size. You write it on one side of the card, and on the reverse, you write a number, the number of the steps, and you can put it on your wall or on your board, and you can get students to volunteer to come up and get one of the instruction cards, and they have to read it, and they have to, without looking back at it, they have to give the class the instructions. So there's that playful element. There'll be people wanting, hopefully, to run to the board to pull out that instruction. Your less confident or lower ability learner won't be too stressed out, because they have the option to either read the instruction, open your book to page 27 is something they can read out, or they can, you know, paraphrase, they can say out what they've read. So they could tell the classmates, we're working from page 27, something like that. And that, you know, that running to the board, that being involved, like what Gabi said, also has that element of playfulness.
That's nice. It's nice and interactive then as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're not just sitting there, they're moving around.
Yeah.
Hopefully that was
Thank you.
helpful, David.
All right, thank you very much.
David, what do you
Thank you
do
very
though?
much.
What do you do with your playful students? Do you have a strategy that you'd like to share with us?
Yes, I share jokes with them. I share jokes with them. I try to tell them a story, you know, to get their attention. After giving them a story, I now relate them back to the topic I need to teach for the day. Yes. Or at times I don't. In fact, it's either I make a joke or I tell a story.
And do
That's
they get
really
engaged
nice.
with the content then?
Yeah, I didn't get that question.
Yeah, do you find that then gets your students excited about the lesson?
Relaxing, they don't relax. My students don't relax.
Do they get excited about the lesson from hearing your jokes and stories?
Yes, they do. And they use that also to fish out another story, something related to what I've said. You know, thereby I get their whole attention.
What you can do also, David, is that if you have a dice, you can make a dice, or I don't know if you have the possibility to create a spin wheel in your class. I mean, it all depends on what we have available to us. You could have, let's say, a dice. If you create your own, then you would have the numbers 1 to 6, and each number would have something. So for example, number 1 could be David tells a story. Number 2 could be the name of another student. So you could say a female student, a girl tells a story. Number 3 could be a boy tells a story, and then, you know, or then a joke, and so on, so that you can say, right, we're going to roll the dice, and whatever number it lands on, then it'll be either me or, you know, a female student or a male student having to tell a story or a joke. And that creates a little bit of suspense as well, because they're looking to see. And you can also, you know, let one student, a different student at every lesson, be the dice master or the spin master, you know.
I love that idea as well. You're keeping the students on their toes then as well. They're not just, it's a routine, but then you're still, it's an unpredictable routine. That's really nice.
Okay. And also, sometimes I get to tell a student to tell the class what he or she learned from the last lesson before doing that. Thereby, too, I think I've gotten their attention that way too. You know, trying to call it, especially the most playfuls. I can call, okay, Victoria, you come out, John. Yes, I at the last class. With that, everybody stays at attention, you know, to listen and watch, probably make jest to, you know, that student. So that also could help in getting students' attention too. Whenever I point out to a student to come and, okay, tell the class what we learned in last lesson, it works also. How about that?
Yeah, that's brilliant. And then you can also throw a bit of competition in it, David, because you can do it like as yes, no questions. So, you know, normally that's quite typical. We ask them what did we do in the last class, and we will write it on the board, right? You could do it as a question. You could say, okay, I'm going to ask you some questions, and you've got to either say yes or no, or put your hands up or whatever. And you could say, all right, in the last class, we heard a story about a goat, and maybe you didn't, right? So you can see they're starting to think. Because they'll in the beginning, they'll always think that you're only going to mention things that you did, right? They'll be thinking, oh, a goat, did we tell, you know, did we hear a story about a goat? And then, you know, you can go on with things like, in the last class, we learned new vocabulary about the sea, and so on. And they have to decide whether that was something they did or not. So, you know, that adds a bit of variety.
All right. Thank you so much. It's a great one. I've learned that. I think I'll do that also. Brilliant idea too, ma'am. Thank you so much.
I'll try that tomorrow in my own class.
I'll do that too. I'll do that too. I'll do that too. Yes. All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Lydia, we have one question that Gabi had mentioned. Why? About the importance of students understanding why we're asking them to do what we're asking them to do.
So the importance of the instructions that we're giving them?
No, kind of like if you say, I want you to do this vocabulary exercise. So some teachers would just say, here, do this vocabulary crossword. And then, you know, happily, there you go, work in pairs. You've got 10 minutes. How important or how relevant, or would you say there's a different place for this, you know, reason and purpose for a task? I want you to do this vocabulary exercise to review the words we learned in the last lesson.
Yeah, so I think it's important to always give them a reason so that they're, you know, aware of why they're doing these activities, especially I think sometimes when it's more of a fun activity, because there are some students who maybe you'll think, well, why are we doing this? So yeah, always give them a reason. I always like to give a reflective task as well at the end. So, you know, why is what we've done today useful? How will it help, you know, with your social English, or how will it help with, you know, when you're practicing examination English? So, yeah, I do think it's important to always give a reason, and always to make them reflect on the skills that they've been learning and the content of the lesson also.
Yeah, I find that with adult learners, or exam classes, that is extremely important. Adult learners especially, because, you know, they've got 60 minutes or 90 minutes in their language class, and they're under so much pressure. So they want to know, how is this going to be useful for me, right? With lower level learners,
I think you could still do it, but in a
you could do it, but
way.
not exactly, not mention.
Yeah, maybe you could color code things and maybe have traffic lights to point in different information, and just to make it more simple.
And you're using different vocabulary anyway, because I would say, you know, with 13, 14-year-olds, you'd be saying things like, we're doing this crossword just to remind you, or just to review the words that we did in the last unit. Or, you know, we're doing this reading exercise to give you some training or some practice in skim reading, for instance. I think what's, for me also, what I tell my own teacher trainees is that when we plan an activity or a task in our lesson plan, we always have to think about the purpose, because it helps us. It doesn't just help the learners, but it also helps us, you know, as teachers, to kind of think about the relevance of what we're getting them to do. Do you know what I mean? Like if you have, let's say, 10 minutes at the end of class, and you think, all right, well, we'll just play a game.
Yeah,
you can't really, that's not really, you know, we're playing this game to fill in the last 10 minutes. No, I mean, why did you choose that game? Oh, you know, to kind of review or consolidate vocabulary. So it kind of makes us think about the value of what we're making them do.
Yeah, definitely. It should all be related back, shouldn't it, to your aims and the objectives and what you wanted to get out from the lesson. So it's always, do you show your students the aims? Do you have, you know, like maybe a menu of what's going to happen during the lesson?
You know, in an ideal world, I would, and I tell my teacher trainees that they should do that. But I think what I do is I do a menu. It really depends on the lesson. You know, I teach different courses. So I do have a menu for certain courses, and I said, this is what we're covering today. And then we just take it off as we go along.
Yeah, I like to do that as well.
Yeah.
I think for the students, but for me as well, just to remind myself, you know, oh, we've done this bit. And I think it helps with instruction giving as well, because then you know that you've gone through what you needed to cover within the lesson.
Yeah. Yeah. Gabi wants us to try your reflective idea.
Yeah, well, it's a good idea. We'll see how that works.
Would you like us to do it now, Gabby, or how are we set for time? I think we've got time for us to reflect, haven't we? And then share our reflections, maybe. Yeah.
1 minute to think.
Okay, so if we all could take some time, 1 minute, and think, indeed, Gabby, yeah, what our takeaway is.
Yeah, I think it's important as well to think about any ideas from today. How are you going to implement them in your lessons? How can you actually use them practically, the ideas?
Okay, so let me also be a model learner and write that in the chat.
Yes.
So how can you implement what you've learned today in your own classes? Does that sound good to you?
Yes.
Right, so let's think about, so let's take a minute to think and then share quickly in the chat. And then if anybody wants to just share it verbally, you don't have to write in the chat, just put up your hand. So 1 minute thinking time. Are you thinking of one as well, Lydia?
Yes, but Gabby's beat me to it because I love the number cards idea as well, and putting the instructions on the wall so that the students, because it's so interactive, and
you know, I just thought about that today
as well.
That only just
brilliant.
I am going to use David's story joke idea.
Yeah, that was lovely too. It sounds like David has really nice students.
Even though they just want to play.
That's the best way to learn sometimes, though. Play through learning. I bet they learn a lot.
Mm.
Oh, there's lots coming through.
Guiding, yeah. Yeah, a lot of it is guiding.
Yeah, getting their attention. Like, yeah, telling jokes. Yeah, breaking down the instructions into bite-sized chunks.
Yes, imperatives, Salvatore, definitely imperatives. I think, especially for teachers whose first language is not English, if you've been, you know, to school and studied your subjects in a different language. My example, I have German students, and the German classroom is quite formal, and instructions would be really long, that they've got all that social language, that hedging. So I have German students German teacher trainees who, when they give instructions, they would say something like, so please now, I would really like it if you got together to work with a partner. And in English, it's quite common, and my students get very shocked when I tell them, I say, it's quite common to say, I want you to work in pairs, and then I walk around the class and I say, 2 of you and 2 of you and 2 of you. They get very shocked, because in German, there's that whole, please, you know, kind of like, if it doesn't trouble you too much, I'd like you to work in pairs. Yeah. So you have to kind of remember and teach your students that as well, that's quite common in English. You know, you have it, let's say if you're traveling, they'll say, please, ticket holders, group A, make your way to the boarding gate. You know, they're not going to ask you for your pleasure in doing
Take
that.
out the words that aren't important, isn't it? And just stick to the important words.
Yeah.
Oh, lots of people saying singing songs, playing music, the breathing techniques.
I like what the way Aruvi articulated it, the pulse of the class. I think that's very important, isn't it? Is your class like, or is your class tired and after lunch and ready to sleep? That's really nice.
like we said, it could be different on, you know, any other day, couldn't it? They could be, you know, lots of energy that one day and then a bit more laid back the next day.
Yeah.
So
I
adapting as
teach
we go.
I teach one course 4 times. I have 4 different groups, 2 on a Tuesday and 2 on a Thursday. My Tuesday group was really slow, and I was like, oh, what's wrong with you? And my second Thursday group, so that was from 12 to 2, it was smack in the middle of lunchtime, and they were the most active class and of all the 4 groups, even though I had the exact same content.
Interesting.
So that's, you know, what
Yeah.
Aruvi says, you know, understand the pulse of your class, look at the dynamics, you
Yeah.
know.
And adapt to it.
Yeah.
So
Well,
David's idea of an impromptu spelling activity, it could awaken their attention. It could also do the opposite. Oh, lovely. I think a good idea as well is to keep reflecting. So if you try any of these techniques or any of the ideas, think about after your lesson if they worked well or if they didn't work well, and what you would try again differently.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Amabel, you said it. It's everybody, not just Lydia or myself. Everybody had so much to share, some really, really good ideas. And I love sessions like this, Lydia, because it reminds us how, you know, we all teach in such different settings, but we all, you know,
there's still something that brings us all together with all the similar, you know, we've all got similar stories, haven't we?
Yeah, and we just want to keep learning.
Yeah, no matter how much experience or how little, you know, it's always good to be reminded of things, isn't it? And to try new things.